The last section of our conic sections is trying to figure out which conic section we are dealing with from the general equation. So a couple things when we start looking at this. We are looking at the number of square terms, the signs on those square terms, and the numbers. So there's a kind of a specific thought process that we want to go through to help us identify which type of conic section we are looking for. So the first thing that we are going to look for is how many square terms there are. So if we only have one square term, that means that we are dealing with a parabola. So parabolas have one squared term. And it doesn't matter if it's an x or a y. If there's one, then it has to be a parabola. So if it has more than one squared term, the next thing that we want to look at are the signs. So do we have two positive square terms, or do we have one positive and one negative? So if we have one positive and one negative, that tells me that we have a hyperbola. So one positive and one negative squared term. Now, if we have two positive square terms, it could be a circle or an ellipse. So to decide the difference between the two, we have to look at the coefficients, so the numbers in front of those square terms. So if the coefficients are the same, then it's a circle. So these have two positive squared terms. With the same coefficients. Okay, so an ellipse is also going to have two positive square terms. But with different coefficients. And again, those coefficients are the numbers in front of your squared terms. Okay. Now, to make these decisions, if we have more than one squared term, we need our equation to be simplified and our squared terms to be on the same side of the equal sign. Okay. So I'd make a note. So squared terms need to be on the same side of the equal sign, and they also need to be simplified. So if we have parentheses to get rid of or any like terms to combine, we will have to do that. But you do not have to go all the way through the completing the square process to tell which conic section we are working with. Okay. So we're just going to do a bunch of practice problems identifying which conic section we are working with. And when I write my answers, I'm just going to use the first letter of each name. So P for parabola, C for circle, E for ellipse, and H for hyperbola. So I would like you guys to go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure out the answers to each of these. And if you want to skip around, feel free to skip around. So there are 16 total questions. Okay. All right, so on problem 1, we have one squared term, so this is a parabola. On 2, I have two positive square terms with the same coefficient, so that means that this is a circle. On 3, before I can decide what this is, I would need to move my squared term over. So I'm really looking at that 4x squared minus 4y squared with my other things. Okay. So since I have one positive and one negative squared term, that makes this the hyperbola. On 4, I need to do some simplifying, and again, I only care about the squared terms right now. So when I distribute, I'm going to distribute my 8 in. So this would be negative 8x squared, and then here I would need to distribute that 4 in. So this will give me 8y squared. And then if I move one of them over, and it doesn't matter which one, So if I move my y squared over, I'm looking at 8x squared minus 8y squared, and then my other stuff. Now, because these are exactly the same, and if I divide by -1, that would make these both positive with the same coefficients, this is going to represent a circle. Here I need to move my squared term over, so I have 6y squared plus 4x squared. So two positive square terms with different coefficients makes this an ellipse. One squared term means a parabola. Here if I distribute my 4 in, I would have x squared equals, and then a -4y squared. So I would need to move that over. So x squared plus 4y squared plus my other stuff. So two positive square terms, different coefficients, means that we have an ellipse. Here, and they're both negative, so that means if I divide them each by -1, I can force them to become positives. So technically there are two positive square terms with different coefficients. So that is also an ellipse. Here we have two positive square terms, same coefficient, so a circle. One positive, one negative square term, so that is a hyperbola. If I move my y squared over, I'll have 3x squared minus y squared, and then my other stuff. When I move this over, I'm actually combining it with this y squared, so that would make it plus 3y squared. So now I have two squared terms that are both positive with the same coefficient, so that's a circle. 12, I only have the one squared term, so parabola. Here I'm going to distribute, so I'm looking at a -9x squared. So I'm going to need to move one of them over, so I'm going to choose to add the x squared. So I'm looking at 9y squared plus 9x squared, and then my other stuff. So I have two positive square terms with the same coefficient, so that's going to give me a circle. I'll need to subtract my y squared over, so 6x squared minus 5y squared, and then my other things. So one positive, one negative makes this a hyperbola. 15, I have two positive square terms with different coefficients, so I'm going to have an ellipse. And then one positive square term, one negative makes this a hyperbola. And then that will also conclude our unit on conic sections.